The release of some documents related to Jeffrey Epstein in recent days has been, above all else, a media story. Political leaders made strategic decisions to release certain things, knowing that the media would do what the media does. And that left Americans even more confused. In the rush to get you to click, watch, listen, read, news outlets looked for something, anything to play up. But a few lines amid masses of documents can mislead you. Given all the focus on these initial documents, you might not even realize that the so-called Epstein files, the ones you've heard about for so long, have not been released. If you're thinking, huh? I don't blame you. That and so much else was buried amid the onslaught of claims. I'll take you through all this coming up. Plus, the initial release did raise new and serious concerns about the role of the media itself. A New York Times journalist tipped off Epstein about someone working on an expose about him. And Epstein's interactions with author Michael Wolff say a lot about the news business and why people have reason to distrust it. I'll dig into that. Also, in a follow-up to last week, the BBC has apologized to Trump. I'll talk you through that and explain the hypocrisy since the BBC still has lies up on its website right now. Meanwhile, a big news magazine that's part of a billion-dollar news conglomerate is presenting the genocide lie as a fact. I went after the head of the corporation, demanding answers. Also today, a huge story the news is missing. But it's not all bad news. There's also some good news. I have a very cool Thanksgiving-related opportunity for you coming up today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. My name is Josh Levs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, where I fact-check the news. All my years in big mainstream media, 10 on NPR, 10 on CNN, where I became lead on-air fact-checker, showed me how much stuff the media tells you that is not fact-checked and is just not true. And the effects are devastating, especially at a time like this when everybody has access to so many different channels to tell you things. You need to know what's true. The news media is supposed to be the place doing that for you, and it isn't. Speaking of that, I got a great question from someone. So along with this show comes a newsletter, and it's free, but people who take the extra step and become paid subscribers get additional content, including edited, hyperlinked transcripts and more. When people become paid subscribers, they have the option of including a note. I got this one from Victoria Gilbert. She wrote, "I appreciate your commitment to informing people of the facts. Thank you." In that note, she also asked me a question. She said, how can people know that what I'm sharing here are facts? I love that she asked me that, and many of you who have been listening for a while probably know the answer. But since there are new people every week, I'll tell you. Unlike the media, I don't ask anyone to take my word for anything. That's why I make so much available to you in the newsletter. Links, original documents, original videos, and more. And I invite you to tell me if I missed something or tell me if I get something wrong. I would love to do segments called I Stand Corrected. I want to show the media that you can correct yourself and there's no shame in it if you made a good faith effort in the first place. Now, all that said, the media is so disastrous that these things really are clear and concrete so much of the time. For example, last week I told you about the BBC. Multiple problems there. The BBC misrepresented Trump's January 6th speech. They stuck together these two little clips from nearly an hour apart to give you the wrong impression of what he said there. However, I also pointed out that some right-wing media, having a field day with that, are giving you a false positive impression. There are so many lies coming at you on all sides. Well, Trump threatened a $1 billion lawsuit against the BBC. And hey, wouldn't you know it, the BBC apologized to him. That is an important sign in the sense that when enough people speak up, and when people with power speak up, and when there are potentially financial consequences, news agencies can actually admit doing something's wrong. That said, the BBC's apology is also incredibly hypocritical, as I reported last week, because their misrepresentations of his January 6th speech are nothing compared to their pro-Hamas, pro-Islamist terror lies that they use all the time. A shrewd listener sent me this after last week's episode. I pointed out that when the BBC was reporting this ridiculous claim that 14,000 babies in Gaza could die within 48 hours several months ago, they knew it was a lie. Well, a listener noticed that a story claiming that is still up. After last week's episode, they posted a note filled with all these words. It's a 134-word note on top of that story. The note is so long, it only leaves you confused. And the rest of the story still has that lie in it. And on that page, the main thing is still a video of the guy from the UN saying that lie as though it's true. One more note for you on that topic. 2 episodes ago, I had on Mike Pesca, host of The Gist, and Mike and I discussed the definition of genocide and the legal definition and how it's not subjective, it's objective. There is no legitimate determination accusing Israel of genocide. There is proof that, by definition, it was not genocide. Well, now, New York Magazine posted something on Facebook. They stated as though it's a fact that Israel's campaign was genocidal. They just said that with no attribution. No, some people say nothing. That is not journalism. It's exactly how propaganda works. It's what propaganda is. I have now reached out to the corporate owners of New York Magazine. I'll tell you about that later in this episode, but let's jump into this. Initial reporting after some documents related to Jeffrey Epstein were released. I'm going to start with partisan media, and you'll hear why. Here was the end of one MSNBC show and the start of another on the evening of the day that some initial documents were released.
We'll see you back here tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern. Congressman Robert Garcia, ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, is going to be here to discuss the Epstein bombshells his panel released today.
Tonight on All In.
This morning, House Democrats released more emails showing that Trump knew more about Epstein's abuses than he previously acknowledged.
Stunning new emails from the Epstein estate about Donald Trump.
So MSNBC presented this as definitely salacious and very concerning for Trump. And hey, maybe there will turn out to be really salacious, damaging stuff for him. Meanwhile, there's this from Fox.
These would have never run 20 years ago in any kind of media outlet because there was no context. There was no supporting evidence. There was no journalism behind these at all.
One woman's name has been all over the news coverage. And this gets tricky. Basically, there was a message from Epstein mentioning that Trump allegedly spent hours with a girl. In the Democrats' documents, the name is redacted, just as victim. But then Republicans said that document refers to a woman whose name does not have to be redacted. Here's more from Fox.
We have seen Virginia Giuffre prior to when she took her own life in April of this year. She came out and she said there was nothing. The president had nothing to do with anything that was going on. And you bring these emails out as if there is something nefarious going on. It's journalistically malpractice.
Okay, but Fox does stuff like that all the time, too. Taking and playing up out of context quotes or partial documents to suit their narrative. We, as an American audience, those of us who want truth, have no clue what to look at here or what any of these documents actually mean in context. Here's why I started with the partisan stuff. This is what the two parties wanted. The Democrats and Republicans released specific documents knowing what partisan media would do with it. And keep in mind something I've explained on this show. Mainstream media has been blowing it so badly for so long that you can't blame people for having turned to partisan media. I looked at what mainstream media was largely doing with this coverage, and it's not that they all went with one clear narrative. It's that in this breathless rush, they slammed out these stories that create two problems. First, they leave you confused. Like, what? What's happening exactly? Here's a clip from ABC.
In a 2019 email to author Michael Wolff, Epstein writing, Trump said he asked me to resign. Never a member ever. Of course, he knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop. Maxwell is serving 20 years in prison for sex trafficking. Sources say she's angling for a pardon from President Trump.
You heard that quote in there. Epstein saying Trump knew about the girls. But which girls? And what did he know? if the actual context is what some people are saying it is, which is that he knew that Maxwell was wooing maybe young women away from Mar-a-Lago, that is very different from him knowing about underage girls being sex trafficked. And I know a lot of people are completely convinced that he either did or did not know. But in the realm of fact, based on these initial documents, we don't know. And that's just one example of what is happening across the news world. But there's another problem here that I want to tackle with you today. The impression that they're giving you is, well, Democrats say one thing, Republicans say this other thing. And that's not really what's happening here either. Politically, Trump is reaping what he sowed. Because even though he and his spokespeople are trying to call this a Democratic hoax, the Epstein files having so much attention and so many people wanting to know what's in them, this is largely the result of what his team and some other Republicans have been pushing for. During the campaign, Trump discussed the Epstein files and indicated a willingness to release them. That was a very popular issue on the right. And people who went on to become top officials in his administration, they were some of the loudest voices in America, pushing for the Epstein files to be a big issue and for them to be released. Let's start with remarks from Trump himself. He was asked about the Epstein files during the campaign. His own campaign's social media account said he would declassify the Epstein files, among other files. He himself hedged it more. Here's a clip from an interview he did with a podcaster, Lex Fridman.
There's a moment where you had some hesitation about Epstein, releasing some of the documents on Epstein. Why the hesitation?
I don't think I'm not involved. I never went to his island, fortunately. But a lot of people did.
And then they had this exchange about these files as well as other files, including JFK's assassination.
So if you're able to, you'll be...
Yeah, I'd certainly take a look at it. Now, Kennedy's interesting because it's so many years ago. You know, they do that for danger, too, because, you know, it endangers certain people, et cetera, et cetera. So Kennedy is very different from the Epstein thing. But yeah, I'd be inclined to do the Epstein. I'd have no problem with it.
That's great to hear.
Meanwhile, he chose, as his vice president, J.D. Vance. Vance openly and loudly called for these files to be released. And after winning, Trump surrounded himself with people who were making those same demands. His Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., had spoken out about the importance of releasing these documents and not redacting them. Dan Bongino, now FBI Deputy Director, had talked about the Epstein files on his radio show repeatedly and said they would show all these secrets. So did Kash Patel, whom Trump ended up putting in charge of the FBI. Here's what he said to right-wing host Glenn Beck last year. There's a reference in here to the so-called Black Book of Epstein clients.
To me, that's a thing I think President Trump should run on. On day one, roll out the Black Book.
All these folks were pushing for it. They played it up in MAGA circles. Then in office, Trump, for some reason, decided, actually, no, let's not release those documents. As I record this, the actual Epstein files, in that sense, have not yet been released. There were some other documents that Democrats and Republicans had for other reasons. That's what was in the news. But after these big MAGA figures pushed really hard during the campaign, and when your own campaign said you would declassify these records, and then in office you tried not to, of course it's suspicious. This is largely an intra-party battle of Trump's own making. Now, that doesn't mean the Democrats aren't jumping in and using it. There's that too. But that's the part of the story you do keep hearing. What will we end up learning if and when we get massive collections of documents and the chance to attempt to put them in context and figure out what they actually mean? We don't know. Meanwhile, the documents initially released have already sparked legitimate concerns about the media itself because of the role certain journalists played directly in helping Epstein. Unreal. Coming up. I have a new toy for you. This is so cool. Anything you hear on this show, you can instantly, in one click, turn into an image or a video to send to your friends or post on social media or pretty much do whatever you want. Here's how it works. go to the newsletter. There's a link in the show notes, or you can just go straight to it at theystandcorrected.substack.com. Highlight anything you want and just click share. It will offer you the chance to create an image or a video. Not only that, but it optimizes it for whatever you want to do with it. So if you want to put it on LinkedIn, it looks one way, or Facebook, or X, or whatever. I've been getting great engagement on this stuff lately on Instagram. You might want to check that out. It's amazing to see all these responses that come in. You can get this kind of engagement as well. When you create an image or a video and post it, tag me on just about all the platforms. I'm at Josh Leves, JoshLeves. Then I'll see what you put up and I can amplify it and help get the word out so people see what you are sharing. It's another great way to help spread the truth. In a world of disinformation, we need to get people facts plus context. You'll see how it works. It's so easy, and the images come out very nicely. Just go to the newsletter at Substack, called, of course, They Stand Corrected. I'll see you over there. As soon as some documents related to Jeffrey Epstein were released, two media stories surfaced. One involves the New York Times. This is wild. Here's a clip from ABC.
New details emerging from the more than 20,000 newly released documents related to Jeffrey Epstein, some mentioning President Trump. In email exchanges with a New York Times reporter in 2015, Epstein suggesting reporters ask my houseman about Donald almost walking through the door, leaving his nose print on the glass as young women were swimming in the pool.
That Times reporter was Landon Thomas Jr. He was a financial reporter at the paper. He's no longer there. He and Jeffrey Epstein exchanged messages. At one point, Epstein claimed to have photos of Trump with girls in his kitchen, in Epstein's kitchen. But those photos might not even exist. As I record this, it's not clear. In other exchanges, this Times reporter tipped off Epstein about something. Here's the deal. So, as I mentioned, this reporter, Landon Thomas Jr., worked at the New York Times. Meanwhile, there's another journalist. He was a former NYPD detective. His name is John Connolly. So, John Connolly, this detective who became a journalist, contacted Landon Thomas Jr. at the New York Times. And he wanted to ask Landon Thomas Jr. about Jeffrey Epstein because this guy at the Times had written about Epstein in the past. So, he called up this guy at the Times. What he apparently did not know was that this guy at the Times had become friends with Jeffrey Epstein. So, this guy at the Times contacted Jeffrey Epstein and said, this other reporter is asking me questions about you. And he wrote to Epstein, I told him you were one hell of a guy. This took place in 2016. This was years after Epstein pleaded guilty to solicitation of prostitution with a minor. Now, that said, it's unclear who believed or knew what about Epstein in 2016, whether people understood the extent of his depravity or the things he had done. I'll get back to that. But let's focus on this tale of two reporters. This New York Times guy tells Epstein that. And then later on, this reporter contacts him again and says, hey, this guy is digging around again. Now we know about these emails because they were in the trove released last week. As soon as this came to light, I began hearing from people asking me about the ethics of this. Here's the deal. When reporter A calls reporter B at a different news agency to ask questions about someone that person has covered in the past, reporter A has legitimate reason to expect that reporter B will respect the journalistic process and not go tell that other person. But technically, reporter B can do that because he's not divulging something from inside his own news organization. So when reporter A calls reporter B to say, hey, can I ask you about something? Reporter A should make reporter B promise confidentiality. So say, listen, I want to ask you about someone. It's someone you've covered in the past, but first I need a guarantee that you won't tell anyone. Even though, of course, it would be reasonable to expect that, you still should establish it. Because as this show proves every week, there are lots of people in the industry who don't follow certain journalistic standards and expectations. Okay, so that's one journalism story in the mix. Here's another. Let's listen again to a quick clip that I played you earlier.
In a 2019 email to author Michael Wolff, Epstein writing, Trump said he asked me to resign, never a member ever.
Michael Wolff is technically a journalist in the sense that he writes books that are sold as nonfiction. They're these very gossipy insider account type books, and they sell really well. He does a lot of bestsellers, but he does often get things wrong and is not someone I trust for details. Anyway, in these emails, he advises Epstein. There's one from late 2015 when there's going to be a Republican primary. He writes to Epstein, I hear CNN planning to ask Trump tonight about his relationship with you, either on air or in scrum afterwards. And then Epstein writes, if we were able to craft an answer for him, what do you think it should be? Wolff writes back, I think you should let him hang himself. If he says he hasn't been on the plane or to the House, then that gives you a valuable PR and political currency. You can hang him in a way that potentially generates a positive benefit for you. Or, if it really looks like he could win, you could save him generating a debt. Lord. Wolff has now addressed this. He has a podcast, of course. It's called Inside Trump's Head. It's part of the Daily Beast. His co-host pointed out that on social media, there are professional journalists saying a journalist cannot do what he did in these emails. Here is part of Michael Wolff's response.
I often make the distinction between journalists who do what they do, daily reporters, working for organizations, working within a very prescribed set of rules, and what I do. I mean, I'm a writer who manages to make relationships that let me tell a story.
So he's making that argument. Here on They Stand Corrected, I focus mainly on the mainstream media because no one is fact-checking them. So I will tell you, people in mainstream media over the years have fact-checked Michael Wolff's writings. He is going to keep doing this gossipy stuff without the journalistic standards that you need in order to trust something as accurate. He is his own separate thing. He's not a solution to the media's failures and not a representative of them. One more note on the media's role here. There were whispers for years before media really looked into it. There are stories of reporters starting to look into Epstein, and then Epstein's lawyers contacting news agencies, and those news agencies caving in submission. Finally, in 2018, a reporter at the Miami Herald, Julie K. Brown, tracked down victims, and her paper stood by her, and they ran her exposé. That was after the Me Too movement had taken off as part of the backlash to Trump becoming president, and this news agency demonstrated a backbone. And after her reporting in Florida, new charges were filed against Epstein in New York. Victims said that they had shared their stories with certain journalists in the hopes that a story would be published and that others would then come forward and that there would be enough people to stand together. Finally, one reporter did. That is the power of media when it does its job fighting for truth, which these days is so rare. Instead, these agencies fight for clicks. Coming up, a massive story the media is missing involving terrorism in the world's most populous country, which, not coincidentally, is also a democracy. Heroes. Actual, real-life heroes. Toward the end of the year, some news agencies invite people to weigh in on their heroes of the year. Back when I was at CNN, we used to do this annual ceremony thing about heroes, and I was often assigned to handle part of it. But it really only existed because certain people in power wanted to hobnob with celebs, which is gross. Anyway, there are real heroes in the world, like this one group that currently has a sponsorship partnership kind of thing with me. It's so cool, and all they're asking is that you take a look at their website and sign up to get more information. That's it. If you check out this group, and I'm purposely not saying the name, you'll hear why, and you give them your email address, then for a limited time, you help support this show. But it only works if you use the unique link that this awesome group of heroes gave me. So check out the show notes or the newsletter. You'll see the part about heroes. Click that link and give them your email address so they can send you information about their awesome achievements. And if, while you're there, you decide to make a tax-deductible contribution to them for their heroism, go for it. But what they're asking of me is that you sign up to learn more information. And who doesn't want to hear about heroes? So check out the show notes or the newsletter now. In recent days, there have been terrorist attacks, blasts, in India and Pakistan. You wouldn't know it from the coverage, but all of the groups being blamed in these attacks are Islamist, including in Pakistan, when the Pakistani government accuses the Indian government of secretly supporting certain groups in Pakistan. Those groups also are Islamist. I have in front of me here a big story from CNN. It's more than 1,000 words. It's supposed to be this big analysis piece to help people understand what's going on. The words Islamist or Islamic or Muslim don't appear once. News agencies strategically avoid telling basic truths, partly because they've bought into this crazy way of thinking that talking about certain facts is Islamophobic. It's not. But also because the people whom they invite to write analysis pieces very often have their own agendas. India is the world's most populous country. It surpassed China. It's also a democracy. And India and Pakistan were founded in 1947, the same year that Jewish leaders in Israel accepted a partition plan. India and Pakistan were divided mostly along what's now referred to as religious lines. But the protesters around the world don't have any problem with that when it happens there. On a related note, I mentioned earlier that New York Magazine lied in what it said about genocide. Well, New York Magazine is part of Vox Media, which I've talked about in the past. They also own Vox.com, which had probably the worst so-called explainer of any news agency after the October 7th attacks. Anyway, Vox Media was recently valued at $1.2 billion. So when New York Magazine lies, there is a $1 billion corporation behind it. I have written to the CEO of Vox Media, and I'm putting together an open letter that you can join. So you'll find that at the newsletter. This episode had so much help from a listener. He's always checking out social media and other things and seeing what the media is doing wrong. He chooses to be anonymous, but I'm thanking him here. And as I'm tying this episode up, I just got another message from a listener pointing me to an NBC story about the latest with Epstein. And it says in here, as its own standalone paragraph, Trump has denied any wrongdoing and has not been charged with any criminal activity. Okay, that's obviously false. Trump is a convicted felon. What they meant is that he has not been charged with criminal activity in matters involving Jeffrey Epstein, but they didn't say that. And this is something that any basic fact checker would note before publishing a story like this. But here's some good news. So the holidays are coming up. Some of you listening celebrate Christmas. Some of you celebrate Kwanzaa. Some of you, like me, celebrate Hanukkah. This is a message for the Hanukkah celebrators among us, I guess, or really anyone who has a connection to the group of people that I'm a part of, the people of Judea, Israel, Zion, pick a word, known in this country as Jewish people. There is a free Thanksgiving guide that you can get and download from this group that has partnered with me for a limited time. It has what look to be delicious recipes. I want to make these. They look so good. And it has this really nice coloring page for kids at Thanksgiving. There's a bunch of great stuff in there. If you just click the link and download the free guide, then for a limited time, you'll be helping support this show. So check out the link in the show notes or the newsletter to the Thanksgiving guide. And apparently, it's going to give us all some new insights into early religious inspirations for the whole concept of Thanksgiving. If you didn't hear it more than a year ago, on the first anniversary of the October 7th attacks, my episode for you was a speech that I gave, and in there, I discussed beliefs that Indians in America had connections to that group of people as well. I'll repost that link in the coming days to help you find it. All right, as always, I would love to hear from you. Send me your thoughts, questions, ideas, all that great stuff. Two great ways to reach me. The best is through the newsletter, and the second is through a form at my website. joshlevs.com. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you with a special message of thanks next week.